Just ignore her. She can't pay anyway. The words landed on the table like a slap. Not whispered. Not hidden. But before we continue. Said clearly. Loud enough for the waiter. Loud enough for the table next to us. Loud enough for anyone within 10 feet to hear. And for a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to pause. The waiter froze mid-step, holding his small black notepad. My son Daniel stopped reaching for his water glass. Even the couple at the neighboring table turned slightly. But me? I didn't react the way my daughter-in-law expected. I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside my plate, and looked up at the waiter with a calm smile. Could you please call your manager? I said. The waiter blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. My daughter-in-law Vanessa leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, wearing the kind of confident smile people wear when they believe they've already won. The kind of smile that says, I know exactly how this is going to go. But what Vanessa didn't realize in that moment was that she had just made the worst assumption of her life. And within the next 5 minutes, the entire restaurant would see exactly why. But before we get to that moment, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where someone decided who you were, before you even spoke? Where they looked at your clothes, your age, your quietness, and assumed they already knew your entire life story? Because that's exactly what Vanessa had done. She thought she understood me. She thought she knew my place. And she was completely wrong. Now let me rewind a few hours earlier. Because the dinner that led to that moment was already unusual. That afternoon, I received a phone call from my son Daniel. Daniel Hayes. 38 years old. A real estate agent who works very hard to look successful. And when I say look successful, I mean the kind of success that depends heavily on appearances. Nice suits. Photos in front of expensive houses. Fancy dinners posted on social media. You know the type. But Daniel has always been a good man at heart. Just easily influenced. And unfortunately, the person who influences him the most these days is his wife. Vanessa. Vanessa Hayes. 34. Polished. Confident. Always dressed like she's stepping into a luxury magazine photo shoot. And from the moment she joined our family 6 years ago, she made one quiet decision about me. She decided I was insignificant. Not poor exactly. Just irrelevant. Now to be fair, Vanessa has never been openly cruel. Not in the obvious way. She's never yelled. Never insulted me directly. Instead, she specializes in something much more subtle. Little comments. Little looks. Little assumptions. The kind that sound polite on the surface but carry a quiet message underneath. For example, 2 years ago she asked me, very sweetly, if I needed help paying for groceries. I thanked her and said I was fine. She nodded politely. But the way she said, of course, made it clear she didn't believe me. Another time she mentioned a restaurant in the city, a very expensive place called the Silver Oak. She laughed and said, you probably wouldn't like it, Margaret. It's very upscale. As if I had never stepped inside a place with white tablecloths. And Daniel? He usually just sat there quietly when those things happened. Not agreeing. But not correcting her either. And that brings us to the phone call earlier that day. Mom, Daniel said, sounding unusually cheerful. Vanessa and I want to take you to dinner tonight. I remember pausing. Because that almost never happens. Dinner? I asked. Yeah. Somewhere nice, he said. And then he added the name. The Silver Oak. Now if you're wondering why that name made me smile slightly, don't worry. We'll get to that part soon. But in that moment, I simply said yes. Because sometimes, the best way to understand someone's assumptions is to let them reveal them fully. So that evening I arrived at the restaurant right on time. The Silver Oak sits in the center of downtown. Tall glass windows. Soft jazz playing in the background. A place where business deals and expensive wine flow equally. When I walked in, the hostess greeted me with a polite smile. "Good evening," she said. But something else happened in that moment. Something Vanessa didn't notice later. The hostess looked at me carefully. Almost like she recognized me. Then she smiled a little wider and said, "Right this way, Mrs. Hayes." Now I didn't comment on it. I simply followed her to the table where Daniel and Vanessa were waiting. Vanessa greeted me with a tight smile. "You look nice," she said. Which is the kind of compliment people give when they're surprised you managed to dress appropriately. Daniel hugged me quickly. And for the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. We talked about work. About the weather. About some property Daniel was trying to sell. Vanessa ordered an expensive bottle of wine without even looking at the price. She seemed very comfortable in the environment. Very confident. Like someone enjoying the stage she believed belonged to her. Then the waiter approached the table. Luis. 28 years old. Friendly. Professional. "Good evening," he said. "Can I start you off with drinks?" And that's when Vanessa leaned back in her chair and said the sentence that started everything. "Just ignore her," she said, gesturing toward me. "She can't pay anyway." The waiter looked at me. I looked at him. And I smiled calmly. "Could you please call your manager?" I asked. He hesitated for half a second. Then he nodded. And walked away. Vanessa watched him go, still smiling. She clearly thought I had just embarrassed myself. But about 30 seconds later, the restaurant manager began walking toward our table. A tall man in a dark suit. Confident stride. Professional posture. And when he reached the table, he looked at me. Paused. And said something that made my daughter-in-law's smile disappear. "Wait. Wait. Why would a restaurant manager stop mid-step, just from looking at someone? And more importantly, why did his voice suddenly change?" That single word, "wait," hung in the air over the table. The restaurant noise continued around us. Glasses clinked. A soft saxophone played somewhere in the background. But at our table? Everything went still. The manager had just reached us. His name tag read Adrian Cole. 52, maybe. Tall. Professional. The kind of man who has run a high-end dining room long enough to read a situation instantly. And right now, he was staring directly at me. Not confused. Recognizing. His eyebrows lifted slightly, and then he said the rest of the sentence. "Mrs. Hayes?" Now it was my turn to smile. "Good evening, Mr. Cole," I said calmly. And just like that, the energy at the table shifted. Vanessa blinked. Daniel turned his head slowly toward me. The waiter Luis looked between all of us like he had accidentally stepped into the middle of a conversation he didn't understand. Mr. Cole straightened slightly. "I didn't realize you were dining with us tonight," he said. The words were polite. But they carried a tone Vanessa clearly didn't expect. Respect. And suddenly Vanessa's confident posture changed just a little. Not much. Just a slight tightening of her shoulders. She laughed lightly, waving her hand as if dismissing the moment. "Oh," she said quickly. "She must just come here sometimes." Her tone carried a small hint of relief. Like she had solved the puzzle. "Oh, she knows the manager. That must be it." Problem explained. But Mr. Cole didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on me. "Is everything all right here?" he asked. Now here's something interesting about public embarrassment. People assume the person being insulted wants immediate revenge. They expect shouting. Anger. Drama. But sometimes the most powerful move is patience. And patience was something I had learned well over the years. So I simply nodded toward the waiter. He was about to take our order, I said calmly. Then I paused. And my daughter-in-law was explaining that I couldn't pay. There was no anger in my voice. Just simple clarity. Now if you've ever watched someone realize they may have misjudged a situation, you know the moment. It's subtle. A flicker in their expression. A small shift in posture. And that flicker crossed Mr. Cole's face. He turned his head slightly toward Vanessa. Is that correct? He asked. Vanessa smiled brightly. Oh, it was just a joke, she said quickly. But it didn't sound like a joke anymore. And the silence that followed stretched just a little too long. Daniel cleared his throat. Vanessa didn't mean anything by it, he said. Which is exactly the kind of sentence people say when they know someone absolutely meant something by it. Mr. Cole nodded slowly. Then he turned back toward me. Well, he said, Mrs. Hayes is always welcome here. Always. That word landed heavily. Vanessa's smile tightened again. Because now the situation wasn't matching the story she believed. To Vanessa, this was supposed to be a simple dinner. A place where she felt comfortable. A place where she could subtly remind me that her life, her world, was bigger, brighter, and more successful. But now the restaurant manager was standing at our table speaking to me like an old acquaintance. And she didn't understand why. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone's confidence begin to crack? It doesn't shatter all at once. It happens slowly. First confusion. Then curiosity. Then worry. Vanessa was somewhere between the first two. She leaned forward slightly. So you two know each other? She asked. Mr. Cole gave a polite smile. We've met before, he said. A very careful answer. The kind of answer professionals use when they know more than they're ready to reveal. Vanessa laughed again. But this time it sounded thinner. Well, that explains it, she said. But the truth? Nothing had been explained yet. In fact, we were only just beginning. The waiter Luis was still standing there, looking unsure whether he should continue the order or disappear entirely. Mr. Cole noticed. Please go ahead, he told the waiter. Luis nodded quickly and began asking about drinks again. Vanessa jumped back into her confident tone almost immediately. She ordered the most expensive wine on the list. Then she began describing dishes like someone who had memorized the menu beforehand. Daniel nodded along, trying to restore the comfortable atmosphere. But something had already changed. Because every few minutes, I noticed Vanessa glancing toward Mr. Cole across the dining room. Trying to understand what had just happened. Trying to solve a mystery that was growing quietly in front of her. And that's the funny thing about assumptions. When they start breaking, people either get curious or defensive. Vanessa chose defensive. Halfway through ordering appetizers, she looked at me and said lightly, So Margaret, have you been here before? I smiled. A few times, I said. How many? She asked. Oh, I replied casually, since the beginning. That answer made Daniel pause. But Vanessa didn't notice. Because she thought she already knew the meaning behind it. She assumed I meant I had visited the restaurant since it opened. What she didn't realize was that I meant something very different. And a few minutes later, the manager would say something that would force everyone at that table to finally understand the truth. Because Mr. Cole wasn't finished speaking yet. And when he came back to our table, he was carrying something that would change the entire dinner. Have you ever watched someone realize they may have insulted the wrong person? Not immediately. Not all at once. But slowly, piece by piece, as the truth begins to unfold. That's exactly what started happening at our table. The waiter finished taking our order and walked toward the kitchen, leaving behind a strange silence. Daniel reached for his water again. Vanessa picked up the wine menu and began pretending to study it. But her attention wasn't really on the wine. Every few seconds her eyes drifted across the dining room. Toward the manager. Toward Mr. Adrian Cole. Now here's something about people who thrive on appearances. When they lose control of a situation, they try to regain it quickly. And Vanessa was already trying. "So Margaret," she said, smiling in that tight, polite way she often used, "you said you've been here since the beginning?" "That's right," I replied. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You mean since the restaurant opened?" Daniel looked at me again. Something about my tone had caught his attention. I simply nodded. "Yes." Vanessa laughed softly. "Well, that's impressive," she said. "This place is extremely popular now. Reservations are usually booked weeks in advance." "That's true," I said calmly. Then she leaned back in her chair again, confidence returning. "But you know what they say," she added, swirling her glass. "Sometimes knowing the manager helps." There it was. Her explanation. Her neat little theory about why the manager recognized me. In Vanessa's world, everything worked through status connections. If someone knew a manager, it meant they were friendly customers. Maybe regular guests. Maybe people who tipped well. But certainly not anything more. And for a moment, I simply let her believe that. Now let me ask you something. If someone completely misunderstands who you are, do you rush to correct them? Or do you wait and let the truth arrive on its own? Because sometimes the truth has much better timing than we do. And right then, the truth was already walking back toward our table. Mr. Cole. He approached again with the same calm professionalism as before. But this time he was carrying something. A slim black tablet. When he reached us, he stopped beside my chair. "Mrs. Hayes," he said politely. Vanessa looked up immediately. "Yes?" I replied. "I wanted to apologize again for the misunderstanding earlier," he said. "Oh, that's not necessary," I answered. He shook his head slightly. "It is," he said. Then he glanced briefly toward Vanessa and Daniel. "You deserve to be treated with the respect this restaurant owes you." That sentence landed heavily on the table. Daniel's eyes moved from the manager to me. Vanessa sat very still. And I could see the confusion finally starting to form behind her confident expression. "Because respect this restaurant owes you." That wasn't the kind of phrase someone used for regular customers. Vanessa forced another laugh. "Oh my goodness," she said lightly. "Now you're making Margaret sound like royalty." Mr. Cole didn't laugh. He simply looked at her. Then he said something that made the air around the table shift instantly. "Mrs. Hayes has been part of this restaurant since before the doors even opened." Daniel blinked. "What does that mean?" he asked. Mr. Cole looked at me briefly, almost like he was checking whether he should continue. I gave a small nod. And that was all the permission he needed. 5 years ago, Mr. Cole said calmly, the Silver Oak was only an idea. Vanessa's smile faded slightly. The chef had a concept, he continued. But opening a restaurant like this requires investors. Now Vanessa leaned forward slightly. Listening carefully. Daniel too. And Mr. Cole continued. A small group of private investors believed in the project. Then he gestured politely toward me. Mrs. Hayes was one of the first. For a moment. No one spoke. The restaurant noise continued around us. But our table felt strangely quiet. Vanessa blinked. Once. Twice. Then she laughed again, but this time it sounded different. A little higher. A little thinner. "Oh wow," she said. "You mean she helped fund the restaurant?" "Yes," Mr. Cole replied simply. Daniel slowly turned toward me. "You invested here?" he asked. I shrugged lightly. A little. Now if you've ever watched someone try to process information that doesn't match their assumptions, you know the look. Vanessa was wearing it now. Because suddenly her entire understanding of the situation was wobbling. But the real truth hadn't even been revealed yet. She cleared her throat. Well, she said carefully, that explains why you know the manager. Mr. Cole gave a polite smile. But then he added one more sentence. A sentence Vanessa definitely wasn't ready for. Mrs. Hayes doesn't just know the manager. He paused. Then said calmly. She's one of the founding investors. Daniel's mouth opened slightly. Vanessa didn't move at all. And across the dining room, a couple at a nearby table looked over as if they had just sensed something shift in the atmosphere. But Mr. Cole wasn't finished. He tapped the screen of the tablet he was holding. And turned it slightly toward the table. Actually, he said, Mrs. Hayes Investment Group still owns a very significant share of this restaurant. Daniel stared at the screen. Then at me. Mom, he said slowly. But Vanessa? Vanessa was completely silent. Because the entire story she believed about me had just collapsed in front of her. And the worst part? We still weren't finished. Because there was one more detail. One that would change the entire power dynamic of the night. And when Mr. Cole said it, my daughter-in-law's confidence disappeared completely. How wrong can someone be about a person sitting right in front of them? Not a little wrong. Not slightly mistaken. Completely wrong. Because that's the moment Vanessa found herself in. The moment when the story you've built in your head about someone suddenly collapses, and you realize you never actually knew them at all. And right now, the quiet woman she had just told the waiter to ignore was being described by the restaurant manager as one of the founding investors. Vanessa didn't move. Not immediately. She just stared at the tablet Mr. Cole had turned toward the table. Numbers. Ownership percentages. Investment records. Things that meant absolutely nothing to her a few minutes earlier, and suddenly meant everything. Daniel leaned forward slightly, squinting at the screen. Wait, he said quietly. Mom, this says Hayes Group Holdings. Yes, Mr. Cole replied. Daniel turned slowly toward me. You own part of this place? I gave a small shrug. A portion, I said calmly. Now here's the interesting thing about moments like this. You expect shouting. You expect confrontation. But the real power shift is usually silent. And that's exactly what happened. Vanessa, who had been so comfortable earlier, leaning back, making comments, ordering the most expensive wine on the menu, was now sitting perfectly still. Like someone trying not to disturb a situation she didn't understand anymore. Finally, she spoke. You invested in a restaurant? She asked. Her tone carried disbelief. Not curiosity. Disbelief. Because the version of me she had created in her mind simply didn't match the reality she was hearing now. And that's when I decided to explain. Not to embarrass her. Not to prove anything. But simply because the truth had arrived. Well, I said gently, after my husband passed away 15 years ago, I had to make some decisions. Daniel lowered his head slightly. He remembered that time. His father had died unexpectedly. A heart attack. And overnight, the quiet life we had built together had changed. But what Daniel didn't know, what Vanessa definitely didn't know, was that my husband had left behind something else. Not just memories. Investments. Smart ones. Over the years we had quietly built a portfolio of businesses. Nothing flashy. Nothing public. Just steady investments in good ideas. Restaurants. Small hotels. Local companies. And when the Silver Oak was just an idea 5 years ago, one of those ideas came to my table. The chef had a wonderful concept, I explained. But banks were hesitant. Restaurants are risky. Mr. Cole nodded slightly. They always are. So a group of us helped fund it, I continued. Vanessa blinked again. A group? Yes, I said. A private investment group. Daniel leaned forward. How big of an investment? He asked. I smiled slightly. Large enough that Mr. Cole still recognizes me. That answer made Daniel sit back slowly. And Vanessa? Vanessa looked like someone trying to reassemble a broken puzzle. Because every assumption she had made about me was now unraveling. The quiet clothes. The modest car. The simple lifestyle. To her, those things meant one thing. Lack of money. But to me, they meant something very different. Peace. Mr. Cole spoke again. We actually wouldn't be here without Mrs. Hayes, he said calmly. Vanessa turned toward him. What do you mean? Mr. Cole rested his hands behind his back. In the second year, the restaurant struggled, he explained. Most new restaurants do. He looked at me briefly. But Mrs. Hayes increased her investment when others hesitated. Daniel looked stunned. You saved the restaurant? I helped, I said simply. Now here's something interesting. Power doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly. In the form of patience. Or humility. Or restraint. And Vanessa was finally starting to understand that. Her earlier confidence had completely disappeared now. Her shoulders had tightened. Her voice, when she spoke again, sounded different. Smaller. Well, that's impressive, she said. But there was something else in her tone. Embarrassment. Because now the entire table remembered what she had said earlier. Ignore her. She can't pay anyway. The irony of that sentence was now sitting directly in front of her. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Mom, he said quietly, why didn't you ever tell us any of this? I looked at him. Because it never seemed important. Vanessa blinked again. Not important, she repeated. I shook my head gently. Money isn't very interesting conversation. That sentence seemed to confuse her even more. Because for Vanessa, money was often the entire conversation. Where people ate. What they wore. What car they drove. Those were signals in her world. But in my world? They were just details. The waiter Luis returned then, carrying the wine Vanessa had ordered earlier. But now his posture was different. More careful. More respectful. He poured the wine slowly. And I noticed something else. Vanessa didn't reach for her glass immediately this time. She looked at me first. Like she wasn't quite sure where the balance of power at the table had landed. And that's when I decided to change the subject slightly. Mr. Cole, I said calmly. Yes, Mrs. Hayes? Would you mind bringing the updated account records? Vanessa's head snapped toward me. The account records, she repeated. Mr. Cole nodded. Of course. Then he walked away toward the office. And as he disappeared through the back door, Vanessa turned slowly toward me. Because whatever she thought this dinner was going to be earlier, it had just become something very different. And when the manager returned with those records, the truth about this restaurant, and my role in it, would finally become impossible to ignore.